You know how sometimes you just know something's off? Like when your gut is screaming at you that the person you've given everything to is playing you for a fool? Well, that's exactly what happened to me. And honestly, I should have trusted my instincts from the beginning instead of trying to be the cool, understanding girlfriend who doesn't ask too many questions. Look, people love to act like they know the whole story. But they weren't there for the 5 years Zach and I built something incredible together. 27, and finally with a man who actually had his shit together. Or so I thought. Zach was 33, had this decent job in some corporate office doing spreadsheet stuff, and everyone always said we were the perfect couple. I mean, we really were. I put everything into making us work, always making sure he felt supported, always being there when he needed me. Sure, we had our rough patches. What couple doesn't? But I was the one who kept us together through all of it. When he'd get all moody and distant, I'd be the one pulling him back, reminding him what we had. When he'd spend too much time on that ridiculous computer setup of his, instead of paying attention to me, I'd find ways to get his focus back where it belonged. Between us, though, Zach never really matched the energy I brought to our relationship. I was invested in us in a way that, honestly, looking back, he never really appreciated. I gave him everything. My time, my energy, my whole heart, and I thought he was doing the same. We'd been talking about marriage, about taking the next step, and I genuinely believed we were heading somewhere real. I even started looking at rings online, dropping hints about what I liked, because honestly, someone had to move things forward. Zach was the type who needed a little push sometimes, but I didn't mind being that for him. I thought we understood each other. I thought what we had was solid enough to handle anything. There were signs I probably should have paid more attention to. Like how he'd sometimes get this look when I'd call him out on things, like he was just tolerating me instead of actually listening. Or how he'd make these little comments about me being intense, when really I was just passionate about our relationship. But I chalked it up to him not being as emotionally available as I needed him to be. Men are like that sometimes. They need help processing their feelings, need someone to guide them toward what's important. I thought I was being a good girlfriend by staying on top of things, by making sure he didn't just coast through our relationship without putting in real effort. Like when he'd come home from work and immediately disappear into his computer room for hours. I'd bring him dinner, try to start conversations, suggest we watch something together, but he'd always have some excuse about needing to decompress or finish some project. So I'd sit there watching Netflix alone while listening to him clicking away on that stupid keyboard until midnight. Or when we'd be out with friends and some girl would be a little too friendly with him, laughing at his jokes, touching his arm. I'd point it out later, and he'd act like I was being paranoid. "She's just being nice, Eden," he'd say, like I was some jealous psycho who couldn't handle him having normal interactions. But I could see what these bitches were doing, testing boundaries, seeing how far they could push things with a taken man. And Zach was too naive or too flattered to shut it down properly. I thought that's what love looked like. Fighting for someone, even when they don't fight back the same way. Making sure other women knew he was taken. Keeping us connected when he'd rather zone out with his games or whatever the hell he did on that computer for hours every night. I was protecting what we built together, even when he couldn't see the threats right in front of him. So last month, Zach calls me up and tells me his cousin Nicole is coming to stay at his place for a night. Work trip, he says, just one night, and he wanted to give me a heads up since we usually spent most evenings together. I was like, okay, cool. I've met Nicole a couple times at family stuff. Nice enough girl, a little too polished for my taste, but whatever. Zach seemed almost nervous telling me about it, which honestly should have been my first red flag, but I trusted him. I said sure, no problem. Even though part of me was annoyed that he was giving up one of our nights together for family obligations. But that's me. I'm understanding, I'm flexible, I put his needs first, even when it's inconvenient for me. The thing is, Zach has always been weird about his space. Real protective of his apartment, real particular about who comes over and when. He'd get stressed if I left a coffee cup on his counter or moved his mail from where he'd set it. So when he's suddenly opening his doors to house guests, even family, it felt off. And Nicole, she's attractive, successful, put together in that way that makes other women feel small. Every time I'd seen her at family gatherings, she had this way of commanding attention without even trying. Zach always lit up when she was around. Always seemed more animated, more like the version of himself I fell in love with. I tried not to read into it. Tried to be the cool girlfriend who doesn't get jealous over family relationships. But something in my gut was telling me to pay attention. Between us, I'd been feeling like Zach was pulling away from me lately anyway. More time on his computer, less time really talking to me, less physical affection. When you've been with someone for 5 years, you notice these things. You feel the shift before they even realize they're shifting. Like how he'd started locking his phone when he never used to care if I glanced at it. Or how he'd suddenly have work calls he needed to take in private, stepping out onto the balcony and closing the door behind him. So when he tells me about Nicole staying over, part of me wondered if this was his way of testing the waters, seeing how far he could push boundaries with me. But I played it cool, told him it was fine, because that's what secure girlfriends do. Right? They don't make mountains out of molehills. They don't create drama where there doesn't need to be any. Even though every instinct I had was screaming that something wasn't right about this whole situation. I went over to Zach's place the next evening after Nicole was supposed to have left. I had my key. We'd been together 5 years, of course I had a key. And I let myself in like I always did. Zach was still at work, which was normal, but something felt different the second I walked in. Like the energy in the place had changed somehow. The air smelled different, cleaner, but with this unfamiliar floral scent that definitely wasn't from anything I used. I went to use the bathroom, and that's when I saw it. Long, dark hair in the drain. Way longer and darker than mine. Fancy conditioner on the counter that definitely wasn't mine, some expensive brand I'd never seen before, and fucking eyelashes. False eyelashes just sitting there on the bathroom counter like some kind of calling card. My heart started pounding, because Nicole was supposed to be gone by then. And why would she leave her stuff behind unless she was planning to come back? Unless this wasn't just a one-night work trip like Zach had told me? I stood there staring at those eyelashes and everything clicked into place. The way Zach had been distant lately, the way he'd seemed nervous about telling me about Nicole's visit, the way he always got weird and happy around her at family events. This wasn't his cousin staying over for work. This was him moving another woman into our life, into the space that was supposed to be ours. I felt like such an idiot for trusting him, for believing his bullshit story about family obligations. 5 years together, and he was sneaking around behind my back with his own fucking cousin. All those times I'd felt like something was off. All those gut feelings I'd pushed down because I wanted to be the cool girlfriend. I should have listened to myself. I went back to the living room, and I just lost it. His precious computer setup that he spent more time with than me anyway. I grabbed his monitor and threw it as hard as I could. The satisfaction of hearing it shatter was incredible. All those nights I'd sat alone while he clicked away on that stupid thing, ignoring me for some game or project that was apparently more important than our relationship. Then his keyboard, his mouse, all those expensive pieces he'd saved up for while making me feel guilty every time I wanted to buy something nice for myself. I went to his closet and started cutting up his clothes with kitchen scissors. His designer jeans that he'd spent weeks researching before buying, his work shirts, those shoes he was so proud of. All of it destroyed, because that's what he'd done to our relationship, wasn't it? Destroyed 5 years of building something together for some fantasy with his cousin. Every cut felt like justice. Like finally making him face consequences for what he'd been doing behind my back. The whole time I'm thinking about how he'd probably been planning this for months. How he'd probably been complaining to Nicole about me. Making me out to be the controlling girlfriend while playing up how misunderstood he was. How they'd probably been laughing about how clueless I was. How easy it was to fool me with his innocent family story. And when he walked in and found me in the middle of it all, he had the nerve to act shocked. Like he didn't know exactly why I was upset. started yelling at me to stop, calling me crazy, threatening to call the cops. Like I was some random intruder instead of his girlfriend of 5 years who'd just discovered his betrayal. So I slapped him. Hard. Because someone needed to wake him up to what he'd done to us. Zach grabbed my wrists after I slapped him and told me I needed to leave immediately or he was calling the police. The way he looked at me, like I was some stranger who'd broken into his house instead of his girlfriend of 5 years who'd just discovered his betrayal. I tried to explain what I'd found, tried to make him understand why I was so upset, but he wouldn't listen, just kept saying I was out of control and dangerous like I was the problem here. You destroyed my computer, Eden. You cut up my clothes. What the hell is wrong with you? He kept shouting, like the thousands of dollars in damage mattered more than the fact that he'd been lying to me. I tried to show him the evidence, the hair, the conditioner, the eyelashes, but he just brushed it off like it was nothing. That's from Nicole. She stayed here one night for work. I told you that. But he couldn't explain why she'd leave all her stuff behind, why there was so much of it, why everything felt so comfortable and settled like she'd been there way longer than one night. So I left, but not before telling him exactly what I thought of him and his precious cousin. I went home and cried for hours, then started texting him trying to fix things. Because that's what I do. I fight for us even when he won't. I sent him long messages explaining how hurt I was, how betrayed I felt, asking him to just talk to me so we could work through this. I told him I was sorry about the computer and his clothes, that I'd replace everything if he'd just be honest with me about what was really going on. But he had the audacity to block my number. 5 years together, and he blocks me like some random psycho ex, instead of the woman who loved him more than anyone ever had. So I had my friends start texting him, trying to get him to see reason. I had them explain that I was just hurt and scared of losing him, that people do crazy things when they're in love and feel threatened. My best friend Kayla even offered to mediate a conversation between us, to help us work through the misunderstanding. But apparently he blocked them too. Then I found out through mutual friends that he'd changed his locks and was staying somewhere else, like I was some kind of threat to him instead of the person who'd been there through everything. Our friend Tyler let it slip that Zach was crashing on his couch, acting like he needed protection from me, instead of just manning up and having an honest conversation about our relationship. I couldn't understand how he was making me out to be the villain when he was the one who'd been sneaking around. How destroying some replaceable objects was somehow worse than him emotionally cheating on me for who knows how long. About a week later, I figured out where Tyler lived, and went over there with 2 of my closest friends for backup. I just wanted to talk to him face to face, make him understand that what I'd found in his bathroom wasn't normal, that he couldn't just throw away 5 years without at least explaining himself. But when we knocked on the door, he wouldn't even come outside, just yelled through the door that he'd call the police if we didn't leave. My friends tried to reason with him, tried to explain that I was sorry about the computer and his clothes, that I just needed closure. Kayla even offered to wait in the car while I talked to him alone, to prove we weren't trying to gang up on him or anything. But he was being completely unreasonable, acting like we were stalking him or something, when really we just wanted to have an adult conversation about our relationship. Tyler came to the door and told us Zach didn't want to see me, that I needed to move on and get help, like I was some kind of mental case instead of a woman trying to save her relationship. 2 days after that, a police officer showed up at my door with papers, a fucking restraining order. Zach had actually gone to court and told them I was dangerous, that he felt threatened by me. Me, the woman who'd spent 5 years taking care of him, supporting him, being there for him through everything. The officer explained that I couldn't contact Zach directly or indirectly, couldn't go to his workplace or his new address, couldn't even drive down his street like I was some kind of stalker, instead of his girlfriend who just wanted answers. I tried to explain to the officer that this was all a misunderstanding, that Zach was obviously being manipulated by his cousin into thinking I was the problem. But cops don't want to hear about relationship drama. They just serve papers and leave. The officer, this middle-aged guy who looked at me like I was already guilty of something, just handed me the paperwork and told me to read it carefully because violating it was a serious crime. I called a lawyer to see about fighting it, but apparently Zach had taken pictures of everything I'd destroyed and had documentation of all my texts and calls. Made it look like I was harassing him instead of trying to save our relationship. The lawyer, some woman who spoke to me like I was a child, basically told me that the best thing I could do was leave Zach alone and hope he'd drop the order eventually. Like I was supposed to just accept that 5 years meant nothing to him. "Miss Chen," she said, and I hated how condescending she sounded. "Your boyfriend has documented property damage in the thousands of dollars, evidence of you showing up at his temporary residence with friends, and multiple attempts to contact him after he asked you to stop. The court sees this as a pattern of escalating behavior. But what about the pattern of his behavior? What about him lying to me, sneaking around with his cousin, making me feel crazy for noticing that something was wrong?" None of that mattered apparently, because I was the one who'd finally snapped and done something visible. My friends were furious on my behalf. They couldn't believe Zach was being so vindictive, taking legal action instead of just talking to me like an adult. Some of them wanted to keep trying to reach out to him, to make him understand how much he was hurting me by cutting me off completely. But I had to tell them to stop, because I couldn't risk them getting in trouble too. The whole thing was humiliating. Having to explain to people why I couldn't talk about Zach anymore, why I couldn't even mention his name on social media without risking legal consequences. People started looking at me differently, like maybe I really was the crazy ex-girlfriend Zach was making me out to be. But they didn't know the whole story. They didn't see how he'd betrayed our relationship, how he'd chosen his cousin over the woman who'd given him everything. It's been 14 months now since everything went down, and honestly, I'm done pretending this was all my fault. Zach got exactly what he wanted. He got rid of me and probably ended up with Nicole, just like he'd been planning all along. The restraining order finally expired last month, which means he's moved on enough to not feel threatened by me anymore. But by then, what was the point? I've had to rebuild my entire life while he gets to move on like our 5 years together never happened. I had to find a new place to live because too many people in our old neighborhood knew about the situation and looked at me like I was unhinged. I lost mutual friends who chose his side, who bought into his narrative that I was an abusive, crazy person, instead of a woman who'd been betrayed and gaslit for months. My family keeps telling me I need to take responsibility for my actions and move on, but they don't understand that Zach orchestrated this whole thing. He planned Nicole's visit, he left evidence where he knew I'd find it, and then when I reacted exactly how any normal person would react, he used it against me to get me out of his life permanently. That's not crazy, that's calculated. Last week, I saw him at the grocery store. First time in over a year, and there he was in the produce section like nothing had ever happened. He looked good. Better than when we were together, actually. New haircut, nicer clothes, this confident way of carrying himself. Then he wasn't alone. Some blonde woman was with him, laughing at something on her phone while he picked out apples. They looked comfortable together, natural, like they'd been doing this routine for a while. I ducked behind the cereal aisle before he could see me, my heart pounding like I was the one who'd done something wrong. But watching them together, seeing how relaxed and happy he looked, it hit me that maybe I'd been right all along. Maybe there had been someone else. Maybe Nicole was just the beginning. Maybe he'd been planning his exit from our relationship long before that night I found the evidence. The worst part is how easily everyone believed his version of events. How quickly people forgot about the 5 years I spent being the perfect girlfriend, always putting his needs first, always fighting for us when things got tough. All they remember is one bad day when I finally snapped after finding proof of his betrayal. But I'm not sorry anymore. I'm not sorry for defending myself, for refusing to be quietly replaced, for making him face consequences for what he did to us. If he wanted to cheat with his cousin or whoever else, he should have been man enough to break up with me first, instead of making me look like the villain when I caught him. The restraining order was just another way for him to control the narrative, to make sure I couldn't tell my side of the story. And it worked perfectly. He got to paint himself as the victim, while I became the cautionary tale about crazy girlfriends who can't handle rejection. Sometimes, I still drive by his old apartment complex, not because I want him back, but because I need to remind myself that what happened was real, that I didn't imagine the signs, that my instincts were right even if everyone else thinks I overreacted. The new tenants have different curtains in what used to be his windows, and sometimes I wonder if they know what happened there, if the landlord had to replace the carpets or repaint the walls. But mostly I just think about how 5 years of my life got reduced to one police report and a stack of legal papers. How easily love can turn into evidence against you when the person you trusted decides you're disposable. And how the real crime isn't destroying someone's computer, it's making them believe they're crazy for noticing when everything they built together starts falling apart.